Have you ever thought about how Neville Longbottom's fate might be even sadder than Harry Potter's? What if the movies never truly showed the depth of his tragedy? In today's video, you will uncover the heartbreaking truth about his life. Neville Longbottom, clumsy, timid, and often the punchline of a joke. Throughout the Harry Potter series, he was mocked not only by the cruel Slytherins but even by his fellow Gryffindors. To many viewers, he was just comic relief, a contrast that made the main characters seem smarter and braver. It wasn't until the final films that Neville was portrayed as a true hero. But even then, his story felt incomplete. In reality, his journey was far more painful, filled with tragedy that rivaled, even surpassed, Harry's own. His parents, Frank and Alice Longbottom, were brave Aurors who fought against Voldemort as part of the Order of the Phoenix. When the Dark Lord learned of a prophecy about a child who could destroy him, two families fit the description: the Potters and the Longbottoms. Voldemort chose to hunt Harry, but he sent his Death Eaters after Neville's parents. What followed was unspeakable. Frank and Alice were tortured for so long with the Cruciatus curse that they lost their minds. They weren't killed, but they were taken away from their son forever, locked in a hospital, unable to recognize him. Neville grew up an orphan with living parents, raised by his strict grandmother, who constantly compared him to the father he could never live up to. She doubted his abilities. Even his own family thought he might not be magical at all, resorting to terrifying tricks just to force his magic to appear. When he finally arrived at Hogwarts, things didn't get easier. Bullied mercilessly by Slytherins, ignored by Gryffindors, even underestimated by professors, Neville was always in the background. While Harry and his friends dove into adventure after adventure, Neville struggled to make friends or earn respect. But something changed. Slowly, he began to show the courage of a true Gryffindor. By the final battle, he wasn't just standing in the shadows, he was facing Death Eaters head-on, even striking the final blow by destroying Voldemort's last Horcrux, the Snake Nagini. Yet despite everything, his future felt strangely underwhelming. While Harry, Ron, and Hermione took on prestigious roles in the wizarding world, Neville became a professor of herbology. He married Hannah Abbott, not Luna Lovegood, despite hints of a connection between them in the books and movies. For someone who endured relentless bullying, a tragic childhood, and a lifetime of self-doubt, Neville proved himself a true hero. But was he ever given the recognition he truly deserved? Neville never sought glory, but his story deserved more than it got. He was the boy who could have been the chosen one, yet fate led him down a different path, one filled with heartbreak, struggle, and quiet heroism that often went unnoticed. His early years at Hogwarts were anything but easy. While Harry was immediately swept into adventure, Neville remained an outsider, awkward and uncertain. Even among Gryffindors, where bravery was celebrated, he was often dismissed as a lost cause. His own classmates didn't see him as someone capable of great things. They laughed when he fumbled in lessons, rolled their eyes when he forgot a spell, and never expected him to be anything more than the bumbling boy who always lost his toad. But the truth was, Neville had a strength few recognized. He wasn't the type to charge headfirst into danger, but he endured. He got up every time he was knocked down. He didn't have natural talent like Harry, Hermione, or even Ron, but he worked harder than most. Every time he failed, he tried again. When others doubted him, he pushed himself forward. He studied spells late into the night, practiced in secret, and refused to let his own self-doubt define him. By their 5th year, something inside him had changed. Dumbledore's army wasn't just a secret rebellion against Umbridge, it was a turning point for Neville. For the first time, he found people who believed in him. Training under Harry, he pushed himself harder than ever, mastering defensive spells that had once seemed impossible. He was no longer just trying to survive school, he was preparing for war. And when it came, he was ready. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Neville didn't hesitate. While Harry was focused on Voldemort, Neville was leading the resistance inside the castle. He stood against the Carrows, two of the most vicious Death Eaters, and refused to break even when they tried to crush him. He suffered for it, beaten and tortured, but never wavered. When others fled, he stood his ground. When hope seemed lost, he found a way to keep fighting. And then came his defining moment. Voldemort stood victorious, Harry seemingly dead at his feet, and Neville faced a choice. He could surrender like so many others, bow before the Dark Lord and hope to survive. But Neville Longbottom had spent his entire life being underestimated. He had lost his parents, been mocked by his peers, and spent years doubting himself. In that moment, he had nothing left to lose. So he did what no one expected. He stepped forward. He reached for the sorting hat, pulled out the sword of Gryffindor, and struck. The last Horcrux, the final piece of Voldemort's soul, fell before the world even knew what had happened. It wasn't just an act of defiance. It was a moment of destiny. Neville, the boy who had once been seen as nothing more than a joke, delivered the blow that made Voldemort's defeat possible. And yet, after the dust settled, his story faded into the background. While Harry's victory was celebrated, Neville's part in it was almost overlooked. He didn't seek recognition, but it was hard not to wonder. Why wasn't his story told with the same weight? Why wasn't his sacrifice acknowledged in the same way? His life after the war was quieter. Becoming a professor at Hogwarts was an honourable path, but it felt almost underwhelming for someone who had proven himself a warrior. Perhaps he wanted a simple life after so much pain. Perhaps he had seen enough battle to last a lifetime. Or maybe, deep down, he still didn't believe he was meant for greatness. His marriage to Hannah Abbott was another surprise. In the books and films, there had been hints of something between him and Luna Lovegood. They were both outsiders in their own way, both misfits who saw the world differently. It seemed like a natural connection, a pairing that made sense, but the story took a different turn, and Neville ended up with someone who, in many ways, remained a mystery. Still, he carried the weight of his past with him. Unlike Harry, who had found closure through family and friendships, Neville lived with ghosts. He visited his parents in St. Mungo's year after year, knowing they would never recognize him, never know what he had become. The world had moved on, but he was still the boy who had lost everything. Perhaps that was the saddest part of his story. He had won, but victory didn't bring the happiness it should have. While others moved forward, he remained tied to the past, a hero who had fought a war but never truly escaped it. And yet, in his quiet way, he continued to make a difference. He wasn't a famous aura or a ministry official, but he shaped young minds, teaching students the same resilience that had defined his own journey. He showed them that bravery wasn't about talent or being chosen, it was about standing up even when no one believed in you. It was about never giving up, no matter how many times you failed. Neville Longbottom may not have had the grand ending of a legendary hero, but his story was one of the most powerful in the wizarding world. He wasn't just the boy who lived in Harry's shadow, he was the boy who proved that heroes aren't always the ones with the most talent, the most power, or the most recognition. Sometimes they're the ones who simply refuse to give up.